Okay, Tov. Today's daf is daf Chaf Hey in Yebmot, as we learn for Shlomo ben Rachel, Yosef Azriel ben Chaim Michal, and Elazar ben Reuma. So yesterday we had a Mishnah which seemed a little bit out of place. The Mishnah said that if a person is suspected of sleeping with a shifcha or a shiksa, and then she converts or she's free, which is effectively a conversion also, he shouldn't marry her. But if he does, people talk, but try to avoid people talking. Doesn't look good. Looks like you married, looks like you lived with her before, but if you married her already, not the end of the world, you can leave it that way. However, if somebody was suspected of adultery with a married woman, then Bezdin takes him out of that marriage, and if even if the guy marries her, they have to leave. Why? Because he's the boel. It's like a case of a sota, where she's prohibited from staying married to her husband and from marrying the adulterer. That's what the Mishnah said. The Gemara then went into a discussion. Of course, you should avoid suspicion, the look of suspicion. But what's this case where the adulterer, were there witnesses? Rav says there were actually witnesses to the act. So the Gemara goes into a discussion about that. And at the end of the Gemara came out, we said that Rebbe holds that even if there are no witnesses, there's just a suspicion, you have to leave right away. You have to leave the marriage. And Rav said, no, only if there's witnesses. The Gemara came out on Chaf here at the top of the page. The halacha is like both of them. The halacha is like Rav, the Rebbe in the sixth line on the page. So the Gemara says, Kasha, Dini, Kasha. It depends if the rumor did not cease. If the rumor keeps on going, and even if there's no Adam, and we go like Rabbi, she must leave the marriage, and of course not marry the adulterer either. Call the pasuk if the rumor stopped. The Ika Adam, if there's no rumor anymore, the rumor had stopped, but there's Adam, then we go like Rob. Either way, you have to leave the marriage and don't marry the adulterer. Says what do you mean a rumor that doesn't stop? How long does it have to go? My mother told me it's his foster mother who raised him. Dumi de Masa, either people suspected in town. Dumi de Masa means Rashi says it's chashuda, or people were suspected in town. Then it's a day and a day and a half. Lomer lo pasuk. That's only if it didn't stop in between. If the rumor didn't cease in between. If it stopped, it stopped. But if it went on straight for a day and a half, that's considered a long-term rumor that you must stop, cease the marriage and not marry the adult. That's only if it didn't stop. That if it didn't stop because of fear. In other words, if somebody said stop the rumor or I'm going to kill you, in that case, then then it doesn't mean that it stopped. It just stopped because somebody put a gun to their heads to stop talking. It's only if he has no enemies in town. If he had enemies in town, sometimes enemies can start a rumor about you. So you have to look at the circumstances. In any case, we say if it's a long-term rumor that doesn't stop, then even if there are no Adam, but if the rumor stopped, then it's only if there are Adam, like Rav said. It's not awesome. Again, but what is this Mishnah doing over here in Yevamos? So we'll see if there's a hint at it. Tanan Hasam Hamotzi, we learn like this. Gemara in Gittin Ksuba says that if a person divorced his wife, Motzi Yeshim Shemra, there were rumors about her. There were rumors that she had committed adultery. So if he divorces her, he shouldn't take her back. Hamotzi Yeshim Shemra, Lo Yasu, he shouldn't take her back. Why? Because we tell him effectively that if you are divorcing her because of there's rumors about her, then she goes and marries somebody else. Then what happens if one day you find out that the rumors weren't true? If that was the case, I never meant to divorce her. I'm sorry. I take it back. I only divorced her because I thought she was fooling around. But now that I heard that it's not true, then I rescind it. In fact, I never wanted to divorce her. Wait a minute, she's already been married to another guy. She's married to another guy, and the original divorce is not a divorce. What are the children from that guy, from the second guy? Mom's Aram. Was a divorce, but we're afraid that he's going to say, I never meant to divorce her. I didn't mean it. It was only on the condition. Okay, so we tell him it's too late. We tell him, you should know if you're divorcing your wife, there's no backseas over here. You can't go back on it. You can't change your mind afterwards. Don't tell us later on had you not. So we say right up front, if you divorced her because of a rumor, you can't take her back. Now, if meaning can't take her back and the divorce is final. Well, if the divorce is final and she marries somebody else, in any case, you can't take her back. But we're trying to say here that you should just know that it's final. You can't take her back. Similarly, Mishum Netter, let's say she made Nadarim that are impossible to live with. She made all kinds of, she prohibited herself from eating and maybe from living with him, all kinds of Nadarim that impossible to live with. Again, Lo Yasser, you shouldn't say, oh, you shouldn't take her back, because you shouldn't say, we're afraid that she'll go and she'll be Mater Netter, she'll go to a Talmud Chacham, be Mater Netter, and then he would say, oh, had I known you would be Mater Netter, and the Nadarim aren't here, I wouldn't have divorced. The same idea that when you're divorcing her because there's Nadarim or because she's made her life difficult for you to live with her, and because there's suspicions of adultery, you should know you can't take her back. If you're going to do it, it's final. Can't take her back. Okay. All right. That's what the Mishnah says over there. Shalchle Rabba Bar Rav Huna, or Bar Rav Huna, Rabba Bar Nachman. He asked Rabbi Nachman this question. Yom Benner, teach us, Rabbi, Kanas Mao, what happens if he married her anyway? Mao Shiotzi. Does he have to divorce her? The rabbi said, do that. Now, it's really just a good advice. You should know if you're divorcing her because of one of those reasons, you can't take her back. Because if you could take her back, as soon as the circumstances change, you find out that the adultery rumor was false or that you might take her back. And then the kids, which means that you never really meant to give her a get. And then the kids from the other guy are mamzerim. So you should know you can't take her back. It's final. All sales final. This get is final. So he says, what happens if he married her anyway? He married her anyway. He says you're not supposed to. Let's say he married her already. Maush, does he have to send her out? Now, obviously, if she marries somebody else anyway, it's machsi b'shas mishinissus. We would tell him to go out. But let's say she didn't marry somebody else at this point. We're just saying it's the divorce is final. You shouldn't marry. You shouldn't take her back. What happens if he did? Amar lei. So he says, okay, look at this Mishnah. This Mishnah says hanitan al eishesish. If a person was suspected of adultery with a married woman, Motzia, and he divorced her, even though he took her back Yotzi, because it's a question of adultery, and adultery is forbidden. You're not allowed to live with her husband or with the adulterer. So he says, you see from over there, you got to get rid of her. Amalei. So Rabba Barhuna said to Rav Nachman, how can you compare the two cases? There, Bezdin took her out because they found that she committed adultery. Rashi says, Hasamotzia Bezin Shabo Edi Tuma, like Rav said, who saw her in the act, and she's also to her husband, Menatora. They saw her in the act. Hacha Hotzia, over here, he divorced her on her own. He says, I don't like this woman. There's rumors about her. She's gotten a darum on her. He divorced her on his own. How could you compare the two? Over there, where Bezdin took her out because she was caught in the act by Adam, there it's different. There it's Menatora. She's forbidden to the guy. How can you compare it to this case? But over here he did it on his own. For Rav Nachman, what was his svara? He learned that our Mishnah the Mishnah also speaks over there where he divorced her on his own. The Mishnah that referred to yesterday's Mishnah was Alashis Vahutziyua. Not he doesn't mean Vahutziyua that Bezdin took him out because it was a deraisa, because there were Adam. He also learned that it was just Hotziyah. So he says it was simply, Rav Nachman says Nami Otziatan below Adam. He just divorced her because there were suspicions about her. It's the same case. He divorced her because of suspicions over here. He divorced her because of suspicions over there. And there we said that he shouldn't take her back. And if he does, he's got to divorce her. So he says, Hasanami Mastis Nami Otziatan below Adam. Hilkachlo Asur Labal Elam Mishum Lazas Fasain, because people talk, people curve their lips. So Rav Nachman brought that as valid proof. If you divorced your wife just because of suspicion, there are no witnesses, but there's suspicion, and you took her back, you got to get rid of her. It's the same thing over here. I don't mean kill her, rid of her. You got to give her, you got to send her away. How can you compare the two cases? Over there, we're talking about, right? There we're talking about the adulterer. Right, the adulterer. Remember, he said the suspected adulterer of a shivcha or a shiksa. Okay, and then she converted, they shouldn't marry her. But if he does, okay. What about a person suspected of? We're talking about the suspected adulterer. Suspected adulterer is an aishish, and either the husband divorced her or Bezdin divorced her. Even though the adulterer married her, he's got to get rid of it. They're talking about the adulterer. Here we're talking about the husband himself. So the husband himself could have found out that the rumor was not true, and he took her back, right? So how can you compare the two? It's not so bad if he took her back. He took her back because maybe he found it wasn't bad. But there, the suspected adulterer, it's much worse. It's still so. Rav Nachman said it's still comparable. In both cases, the rabbi said, don't take her back. It said the adulterer, don't marry her. And in this case also, if you divorced your wife, the rabbi said, don't take her back. So these cases are similar, and therefore you also have to get rid of her. Velohi, but that's not the case. Hasam alume alma lakola. The cases are different. Over there, it's the adulterer. If a man is suspected of adultery with a married woman, so we say over there, and her husband divorced her, the adulterer shouldn't marry her. Even if there's Adam, for sure not. But even if there's no Adam, there's no Adam over there, it's just a rumor, and he divorced her, the adulterer shouldn't marry, because by marrying her, he confirms the rumor. But over here, when the husband divorced her because of a rumor, and then he took her back, you could say, he took her back, he found out that the rumor wasn't true. She took a lie detector test, and the adulterer was in a different place, or whatever it was, found that it wasn't true, and therefore the cases are not similar, and therefore you wouldn't have to send her away. That's what the Gemara comes out with. What is all this doing here? It's really doing here because a couple of days ago, we learned the complicated case of person married one of two sisters, or two guys married two sisters, and then they got confused and all that. And we said, well, what happens if there are two brothers and the two brothers married the two women at the end? Remember, one, they could always say, well, maybe I hit the right woman. Remember, one was my Yevamot, the other was her sister, etc. So we came out of that. If you married her, you could stay married to her, right? That's what we said in Konas, lo yotzi. So because of that, that's why this case was brought down over here, because the case of suspicion of a man of adultery or a man with a shifcha, what does that have to do with Yevamos over here? It's brought down because of afapisha konas yotzi or lo yotzi. If you went against the rabbi said, don't marry her, but if you did, it's either okay or not okay. That's why these cases were brought down over here. And here again, we're going to talk about, the next mission is also going to be related to that idea of that we're discussing here about Kanas Yotzi or not. We're going to come back to this issue here. Says the Mishnah, the Gemara at the beginning of Gittin says that if a person brings a get, person's a shliach to set a get can be given by a shliach, just like kedushin. Kedushin can be given by a shliach. You could send kedushin. That's how you come out with the case we said of kedushin shalonim tzrelabiyah. You sent the ring, and you said, I'll take one of your daughters, one of your two daughters. I'll take one of your two daughters. He doesn't know which one, so it's kedushin. So he doesn't know who to marry. One is his wife, and one is his wife's sister, who's forbidden to him. That's kedushin. So you could do it by a shliach, and the same thing again. A get is even better to give a shliach. He says a face-to-face fights may break out, so they can send a shliach. So let's say the Gemara there says the beginning of get. Now maybe get if you bring a get from overseas, but Omar, and he has to say b'fanei nechem, b'fanei nechem. The rabbis decree, because there's some suspicion, you really don't know who this guy is. He's coming by himself. It's not two Adam sign. It's not two Adam. To make a get valid, you have to give it in front of two Adam. But the rabbi said, if one guy comes and says b'fanei nechem, b'fanei nechem, he is believed. He's believed said b'fanei nechem, b'fanei nechem, and you give it to her in front of two Adam. So it says in this case like this. Let's say he brings a get from overseas. Lo yisa is ishto, but this guy who brings the get should not marry the girl. How does that look? I came from overseas, and here's your get. Would you like to marry me? That doesn't look to you. It looks like suspicion. Maybe he forged the whole thing because he wants to marry her. So maybe he's not so believed. Okay, she can get married, but not him. But not to him. He shouldn't marry the girl. Okay, now we'll see. It says here Medina Sayam. What about in Eretz Yisrael? Remember in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to say b'fanei nechem. Remember the beginning getting why? Machlokas and Beis over there. Either because in Eretz Yisrael, why in Chutz La'aretz do you have to say b'fanei nechem? Because Chutz La'aretz they're not so bucky, so we're afraid they're not bucky and they don't do it lishma. But in Eretz Yisrael, they knew they wrote the get lishma. That's one reason. Another reason is because in Chutz La'aretz they're far away and you can't bring Adam. If you want to bring Adam to prove it, to confirm it, it's going to be hard. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's local. You'll be able to bring it. Okay, so Gemara is going to discuss what about if the same thing was in Eretz Yisrael. It says didn't get and you said b'fanech like the rabbi said, but he shouldn't marry his wife. Again, suspicion, right? It looks funny, right? It's just like over there, we talked about the Mishnah before about if you're under suspicion of committing adultery or suspicion of living with a shifcha, what the consequences are. So here too, he shouldn't marry his wife. Let's say he says, he comes from overseas and he says he's not bringing a get. He says, your husband died. In fact, or haraktiv, I killed him. Or harganu, we killed him. What's there? Lo yisasishto. Also, he shouldn't marry the guy's wife, because again, he's testifying. God, I have good news and bad news. Bad news is that your husband's dead. The good news is I'm ready to take his place, right? That kind of thing like that. No, you shouldn't marry his wife. Now, it says you shouldn't marry his wife. The Gemara, I'm just leading up to the Gemara. You should marry his wife. But if you said you killed him, she can marry somebody else, you're a murderer. Do we accept testimony from a murder? Doesn't look too good, right? So Rabbi Yehuda says, haraktiv, if he says, I killed him, then lo tina say, not lo yisa sister, she shouldn't get married at all. Because how can you accept testimony from a murderer? He himself says he's a murderer, right? Yeah, right? So Rabbi Yehuda says, the Tanakama says, lo yisa sister, he shouldn't marry his wife. The guy who says, I killed him, shouldn't marry his wife. But mashma, she could marry somebody else. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Haraktiv, if he says he himself killed the guy, she shouldn't get married at all because we can't accept this testimony. Harganu, if we killed him, we'll see what it means we killed him. Doesn't we killed him mean I took part in it too? We'll see. It doesn't mean it exactly. Harganu, let's say he was killed, then tinase ishto. But again, don't marry him. Don't marry this guy. In all these cases, you can't marry this guy, the guy bearing the bad news. Harganu tinase ishto. So Rabbi Yehuda is more machmir, because he says that if the guy says, if the messenger says, I killed him, she shouldn't get married at all. So let's first at the first part. The first mission says if you can get from overseas, you shouldn't marry his wife. Timeliness him because he came from overseas. Because we're depending on him. We're relying on him because he said, there's nobody else, there's no other witnesses here. There's no, we're relying on him to say that they were Baki Lishma, the ones who wrote the get, and that they ate and were kosher, etc., relying on him. Let's say Israel, we're not somech on him. Then apparently he says, Ishtar, you could marry his wife. You could marry, because we're not only dependent on him, you can go and check out and find out that the get was valid. But how is that different from Mace? The next case said in the Mishnah, if he comes and testifies he's dead, I testify your husband died, the lavalekasim, we're not just depending on him. Why is one person believed to say that your husband's dead and she can get remarried? Isha but she's going to check it out. She doesn't want to wind up in a situation where one person said that her husband died, she goes and gets remarried, and then the husband shows up. Not a good situation to be in. So the rule is, the reason the rabbi said, the reason because of iguna, the rabbis were mekel, even allow one witness to testify that her husband's dead. That's good enough because we rely on the fact that she'll check it out too. So here also we rely on the fact when you check it out, so when he says your husband's dead, we also don't rely on him. Why do you say in Eretz Yisrael it's okay? Because we don't depend on the one guy, and therefore, if in Eretz Yisrael a guy comes and says, here's your get, he could marry her because we're not dependent on him. You could check it out and find out where the Edom are, etc. You can check it out. So why, if that's the case, if we don't depend on him, then you say he could marry her. This one person coming along, this shliach could marry her. But why in the case of the mess, when he says your husband's dead, why do we say there he shouldn't marry? Why? When even in the case where he says he's dead, we don't just rely on him. We rely on the fact that she checked it out carefully. And it says, Hasam like Iksava, there's nothing in writing. Hachi Iksava, here he's got a get. There's a get in writing. In other words, if you say that your husband's dead, can she get remarried? Yes, she can get remarried, but she can't remarry just him because it's not so confirmed. She's going to check out and find out that he's dead, but we don't know. Maybe this guy killed him. We don't know. So that's different. But over here, in the case where he comes along with a get is different. Why? Did Tanami learn like this? There are several women who are not believed to testify about another woman, even in cases where we accept a woman's testimony because of Isha, because of Iguna. For example, a person's mother-in-law, sister-in-law, stepdaughter, people like that. Why? Because they're always jealous. They have an ulterior motive. I raised this boy, he made all this money, and now look what the daughter-in-law's getting all the money. There's ulterior motive. So we're always afraid of them. However, if they bring a get, then they're believed. In other words, if these women come along and say, your husband's dead, we don't believe them. But if they have a get, they're believed. What's the difference? Ma ben get lemisa, shek sav mochich. You got something in writing. Not so simple to forge a document, right? If it's just your word, we don't have to take it. You don't have to take you at your word. But if you've got something in writing, that's different. So therefore, we say in our Mishnah, the beginning of the Mishnah, he shouldn't marry his wife. Yes, he shouldn't marry his wife. The messenger shouldn't marry the wife because we don't trust him so much. In Eretz Yisrael, though, we can verify it, and therefore he could marry the wife. However, that's different than just coming along and say he's dead. He's dead, not so much because there's nothing in writing. And even though she's going to check it out, she'll check it out and make sure that he's dead, but we don't know about him. Okay, then the Mishnah said, so that here we have machlokes in Tanakama Rav Yehuda. Tanakama said, whether the messenger said your husband's dead, or I killed him, or we killed him, he shouldn't marry his wife. Rav Yehuda says, if he says I killed him, then she shouldn't get married at all, right? Lo yisas ishto sounds that the Tanakama says, he shouldn't marry his wife. Who knew the lo yisas ishto, says the Gemara. He himself shouldn't marry the wife. Halachish nothing, but she could get remarried. How can she get remarried based on the testimony of a guy who says I killed him, right? Rav Yosef says, Ploni Ravani Lonsi. Rav Yosef says, listen, a man comes along and says that this man, what's the word in English? Committed sodomy on me. He sodomized me. This man sodomized me, meaning he forced me. He sodomized me. Hu va'achar mitzvah from the Hargo. So let's say they talk about Tyler. Tyler sodomized me. Okay, let's use the not a nice a goyish name. Tyler sodomized me. Okay, so is he believed now? If he committed sodomy, he's right to be death for death. So this guy who testified, the victim himself testified with another witness. That means there's two witnesses that said that he committed sodomy, and which is forbidden in the Torah. So huva acher, him and another person commit stuff, can join together to kill the sodomizer, the perpetrator, right? You get to kill Tyler. Lirtsoni, let's say though that the Jewish person comes along and says, he didn't sodomize me, I did it willingly. I did it willingly. So, but there's no, so Russia, the guy who's testifying himself, he says, I committed homosexuality with another guy. We did it willingly. So you're a Russia. You can't allow Russia to be a, and therefore you can't kill the other guy. See, if the guy says he sodomized me, okay, the one who testified, I'm testifying, I'm the victim, and another witness saw it, so we can kill that guy based on that. Bezin will kill the guy. It's 280. But if he says I did it willingly, so he himself is a Russia. He can't believe. So how if in this case then in our Mishnah, how does the Tanakhama say that if the murderer says, if the guy comes and says, I murdered your husband, okay, I can't marry your wife, right? But your wife can get remarried. How can you accept his testimony? He's a murderer. Oh, it's different. When murder, it's one thing, or sodomy, it's one thing. If a guy's a Russia, he's not a good aid. But over here, Mishumiguna, Kila Barabana, aid is different guy, they were Mako, and therefore you couldn't marry. Menashe said that Gazel did the Ram Kashal Aid Isha. A person who's only got one thing Goslin the brand, he's a gambler. Is he a real Goslin? He didn't steal the money, but he's a gambler. Exactly. Correct. Because he's over in the Torah. Just like if he says, I don't keep Shabbos. I don't keep Shabbos. I don't believe in Shabbos. Can't testify. He's a Russia. So same thing here says Goslin the Devrayim Kasher Leida. So Nash says that even if he's not over on the Torah, he's a gambler. He's a gambler. So the rabbi said that's a bad guy. He's still kosher Isha. Goslin the Divrei Torah, but if he's an out and out robber, murderer, stealer, adulterer, Machal Shabbos Befresia, he goes against the Torah. So Pasalei Isha. He's not good for Isha. So that's what Rav Menashe says. So what difference? You say, well, we're saying here if a guy says he's a murderer, how could you believe him at all? Forget about that. He can't marry the guy's wife. I murdered your husband. You can't marry his wife. Of course not, but she can get married to somebody else based on the testimony of a murderer. He's a Russia. How can you believe him? Even for Isha, he says it's not good. Name me Rav Menashe, the Amar Rav Yehuda. You're going to say that Rav Menashe, who's so machmer and says, maybe he holds like Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Taka says that haraktiv, she shouldn't get married to anybody else. You're more machmer. Rav Yehuda says if he says I killed him, she shouldn't marry anyone else. But the Tanakama says I killed him, I can't marry her, but somebody else could get marry her. Does he go Menashe? Says Rav Yehuda, says Gemara, says no. Rav Menashe will say, Rav Menashe, I could even go like the Rabbanan. I can come like the Rabbanan who say that she could get remarried. That's not to me. Right? The time of the Rabbanan, the reason for Rabbanan's reason is listen very carefully. Rava says over there that in the case where he says, I committed a homosexuality with this person, with this other guy, and I'm a Russia, Adam Karvet says, you're not believed to say anything about yourself. Russia. A person is Karv, like you can't give testimony about your brother, about your wife, about your son, about your parents, right? You can't give it. So the same thing, you have to testimony about yourself. For good or for bad, you're not believed. You're not believed. You say I murdered, we don't believe him. So he says, Russia, meaning over here, what does he say over there? Over there, we say Pagina Dibura. Meaning, Rabbi Yosef says, if a guy says what? If the victim says, he committed sodomy on me, so I and another good witness can kill that guy, in court, right? But if I said I did it willingly, right, then I can't. That's what Rabbi Yosef said. And then I can't because I'm a Russia. Rabbi says, no, I'm not believed to say that I committed the act on purpose. I'm believed that I had homosexuality with that guy, but I'm not believed that I did it willingly because I'm testifying about myself, but I am believed to testify about him. So Rabbi says in both cases, whether I said he committed sodomy on me or whether I did it willingly, we're believed about me and another guy can be believed about him. And I'm here too. When he says, I killed him, what does that mean? He's dead. But not believed to say about me. They're not believed about myself that I was one who killed him. Rashi says, a person can't give testimony about himself, allows us to be a Russia. We say, if you admitted it, it's like 100 Adam. That's for money. If I admit I owe you money, fine. But to make myself a Russia, to be a chayiv, a knas or an onish malchus or anything like that, to be puzzle, not believed. And therefore the Rabbanan say over here when he says, your husband's dead, I killed him, or we killed him, he's believed that the guy's dead. You can't marry him yourself because you're suspicious, but they believe that the guy's dead and she can get remarried. Yes. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so now that's the Tanakama. So now says Gemara Lamer Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef, though, who says no, that in the case where he says, I committed homosexuality with that guy willingly, I'm a Russian, I can't give testimony about him. So Rav Yosef, he goes like Rav Yehuda says over here. Rav Yehuda says that in the case of Rav Yehuda Haragt, if I killed him, she shouldn't get married because we don't believe him. Let's say he holds that. Rav Yosef says, no, I could even go like the Rabbanan who say that she could marry somebody else. Shiny Edesisha, the Kila Rabbanan. Edesisha, yes. Normally I would say, Rav Yosef says that when a person testifies about himself, he's a Russian, he can't give testimony. Oh, we don't believe him at all. But over here, it's because of Edesisha, Kila Rabbanan, the one we're making, and we allow her to get remarried. Rav Menashe could be Rav Menashe will go like Rav Yehuda, that I would say that Rav Menashe holds like Rav Yehuda that even for Edesisha, Rav Menashe holds that Gazlan Debrei and Puzzle Edesisha. He'll go like Rav Yehuda. Rav Menashe will go like Rav Yehuda, but I won't. Rav Menashe himself will though say, no, I could even go like the Rabbanan, but over here he's not a Russia because he can't testify about himself. But a person who's really a Russia, a Gazlan Debrei Torah, then he can't give testimony even about Edesisha. That's what Rav Menashe said beferish. So Gemara says, now let's go back to his story. He said, your husband's dead, or I killed him, or we killed him. What's the difference if I killed him or we killed him? Either way, he's a murderer. Why does Rav Yehuda say? Rav Yehuda says, if he says, I killed him, then she shouldn't get married at all, right? Because he's a Russia. He can't give testimony. His testimony's no good, right? And Rav Yehuda says testimony's no good. But if we killed him, then the testimony is good. She could marry somebody else. Haraktiv, I can't marry, she shouldn't get married at all. Harganu, she could marry somebody else. Either way, she can't marry this guy. Everybody agrees with that. But the question is, could she marry somebody else? So Haraktiv say, what's the difference? I'm Rav Yehuda, Omer Ani Esim Harga. Haraktiv means I was there. I didn't touch him though. I didn't lay a finger on the guy. But I was just there. So then he wasn't a murderer. Iva Tanya. It's a shalom. Rashi learns this is like nichusa, but Rashi doesn't say b'nichusa. Rashi seems to say that's from Rashi. There's no lashon nichusa. It's mashma tzikasha. Iva Tanya, told Rav Yehuda How could that be? There was a story with one bandit, bad guy, a highwayman. They took him out to be killed. They took him out. He was sentenced to death. They took him out to kill the Megizas Kaputkia at the crossing of Kaputkia in that place. So Amar Lehem, and he said, "Listen, I know I'm dying now. I'm going to the gallows. Amar Lehem Lechu Imrlo LeEsha Shimon ben Cohen. Go tell Shimon ben Cohen that Ani Arakti. Go tell his wife Ani Arakti, but I killed her husband. When I came into Lud, when he came into Lud. In other words, I'm admitting now. Go tell him that her husband, let her get remarried because I killed her husband." He's like, on his deathbed, he's telling the truth as he's being taken out killed. And they let his wife get remarried. So what do you see? That even a person who was a Rasha, so he's saying over here, when he says, I killed him, that's no good. They killed him. But over here, the guy himself killed him. He said, I killed his wife, and they married off his wife. Amalem, Misham Raya. What's the proof from there? But Omar Aniyas Margav, there he said, I was with the murderers. I wasn't the murderer himself. I was with the murderers. I've listed Tani. So what's the kasha over here? If you learn it's Mashma, he says Omar Aniyas Margav. But over there it's Mashma that even if he says I was the murderer, that he's believed, the Gemara says no. So a beautiful answer. It's also he says I was among the people there. I wasn't really the murderer. But listen, Tony, he's a bandit. They took him out to, he says he was a bandit, but he was a murderer. He was arrested for that reason because he was among them, but not that he was going to. But it says he was being taken out to kill, so he was mashma that he was a murderer. But listen, but Tony. Says he was being taken out by a goyish court who are not, or they are not that discriminating, and they kill people very easily. Okay, take him out, kill him. Even a Suffolk, they kill him. So therefore, he wasn't the real murderer over there. If he's the murderer, he says I killed him, then she can't even get married at all, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because we don't accept this testimony. We don't accept this testimony. Correct. Yeah.
For being a thief.
Yeah. But maybe he wasn't. But he says. But we don't know what his avera was. He says he wasn't the murderer. He was among them.
No, but he was.
But he was. He was arrested for being involved. For being involved. So under the RICO Act, he was involved for racketeering with them. It's not clear what he actually did. Pardon? Accessory to that.
What I'm saying is,
yeah.
You're accusing the Goyish court of not being so particular about it.
Right.
I'm saying, according to Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, isn't the penalty for robbery also?
Yes, but that's when it's administered by a Jewish court. It's a Jewish court. It's a Goyish court. They do anything. They don't like the guy.
It's a righteous Goyish.
Right, righteous Goyish. Let's say a woman made a neder, and her husband can be breaking the door and beino lebeina if it's something that affected their own lives. He can break it in the first day. Remember, that's the parsha. But let's say it was a neder that wasn't between them, and she had to go to a bezdin, and bezdin was not matzah the neder. What does it mean bezdin not matzah? They made life difficult for her and her husband, effectively forced her husband to divorce her. So if a chacham who answered his wife and neder al bala, he shouldn't marry her. As the chacham was acting as the bezdin, they went to the chacham and he said, I'm not matter your neder. You better get divorced. Can he marry her? No. Again, the same thing. He shouldn't marry her. Looks suspicious. Looks like he was playing around. Oh wait. So we'll talk about it. What kind of a bezdin was it? Let's say though, what is mian? Mian is, remember, when there's only marriage rabbanan, a girl's less than 12 years old and she can walk out at 12. You have to go to court and she says, I refuse him. Or she did chalitza. They did chalitza, even if she was, 20, whatever. But you have to do it in front of a court to make sure it's all proper. Right? She goes to the bezdin, and bezdin says, say this, and the whole process. We'll see that later on in the Masechet. Then he could marry her. You said, why? Neshu bezdin. He's not doing it himself. He's part of bezdin. He's part of a group of 3. So there, if he was part of a bezdin that accepted her miyun, and says, yes, you can go away from your husband, or chalitza, you don't have to marry this guy, carried it out, one of the judges could marry her because it doesn't look suspicious because he was with other guys. It wasn't like, you don't expect that. It's not like he played some game. So the Gemara says, what's the first case then? He said over here, if a chacham says what? The chacham says that he says he's not matzah her neder, meaning he's forcing her out of the marriage effectively. He should marry her. But what's mashma? That if he was matzah her, he was matzah the neder. And let's say anyway, even though he's matzah the neder, and she could go back and live with her husband, but whatever, the husband divorced her anyway, or he died, or whatever, this judge could marry her subsequently. But my skin, what's the case over here? If you're talking about he was a court of one, can one person be matzah and neder? We always sit in front of, we always get three idiots here to do it together, right? It's always three guys, right? Oh, very good. We're getting it. Very good. You remember something from 7.5 years ago, 15 years ago, 22 years ago. So how could he have done it by himself? Plus, if there were three people, why is he suspected? The end of this mission says, that has to be in front of the best three. He can marry Bezdin. It really was one. Like Chissa says, like you were quoted, what does he say? If you have an expert, one Talmud Chacham who's an expert, could be matzah and neder. We get three people because we're all idiots, right? But if you have a Talmud Chacham who's an expert, he could do it. So if he did it on his own, he was the one, she came before him to be matzah neder, and he says, sorry, you have to leave your husband. I can't be matzah neder over here. He shouldn't, and then she gets a get the next day. The following day, he shouldn't marry her because it looks suspicious. It looks like he forbade her and her husband, you shouldn't stay with that guy, get divorced. That doesn't look good. You shouldn't. Okay, fine. What about if he married her anyway? We're going to come to that. That's what this series of Mishnayos is about. Okay, let's say though she did me and her chalitza in front of the bed, and then it's okay. He could marry her because it doesn't look suspicious because he had to do it. He was part of a court. Maybe he just got to meet her then, but he didn't. It doesn't look like he was playing a game. Time at a bezdin. Oh, wait a minute. It says it's a bezdin. Let's say it was on two guys. Let's say there were two guys who were giving testimony or in some way getting her out of the marriage, right? Time at a bezdin. Habitray lob, not in first bezdin. Maisha house is different. Let's say two people come along and say, yes, this is proof where we signed this document, this bill of sale indicating that Reuben sold the field to Shimon, right? Reuben says it's mine. And she says, no, you sold it to Shimon, and Shimon's a friend of ours, and Shimon's going to sell it to us later on. And I said, but it's okay. Or I'll get Isha. Or let's say two people are signed on a get. The Chacham aren't worried about here any suspicion. If let's say two people come along and say and bring a get, or they're signed on a get, two people are signed on a get, and then later on one of the witnesses marries her. Is that suspicious too? After all, maybe the whole get was forged? No, because there were two people. It wasn't him himself. He was with somebody else, and we don't suspect the communion. So what do you need three people for? Even two is enough. The answer is no. He grew for kamashman. You're right. Two is enough. Two is, as long as there's somebody else involved, it doesn't look suspicious. He's just telling us, he grew for kamashman is telling us to exclude from the mandam, which says later on, me and b'fnei shnai. Me could even be in front of two people. You don't need three, a court of three. Kamashman, that me and is also in gimel. You really don't need three. As long as there's two people there, it doesn't look suspicious. Pardon? Yeah, three people can collude also. But the point is we don't automatically suspect Jews of doing these things unless there's reason for it. A guy and alone we suspect, but if two people we don't suspect collusion. Iboilu. I mean, don't forget, it's not like the action just didn't happen in a vacuum. She's a little girl and she's looking to get to leave the marriage, and there's other people involved over here. Same case of chalitza. There's a dead brother Ruvain, and there's a chalitza involved, and it's not that hard to be matzah chalitza. We all know the guy's dead, no children. You have to do yibum or chalitza. Today we don't do yibum, you got to do chalitza. So if one of the two judges or three judges over there marries her subsequently, it's not like there was some collusion. What did he do? He killed Reuben to begin with. It's not that far. Iboilu. In both these cases, this case of this Mishnah, the Chacham, Rashi says, or the previous Mishnah, maybe getting Dina Sayam. It says when you bring a get, he shouldn't marry her. Okay, let's say he marries her anyway. What do you say there? Hamotzi get. That's the question over here. Eboilu, Kanas, this is the question that was raised. Kanas, and that's why it's brought down here. That's why the Mishnah is here. If he married Mao Shios, does he have to divorce her? Rav Kana Amar Kanas, Motzi, he has to divorce her. Rav Ashi Amar Kanas, Eino, doesn't have to. Tanilu Rav Zuti, Rav Papi. Rav Zuti from a puppy from the school of Rav Papi learned Kedevi Omer Kanas Einamos. He doesn't have to divorce her. Amalei Rabban Ravashi Gemara or Svara. Do you have this as a tradition? Do you have a Kabbalah that he doesn't have to divorce her? Or is it your own logic? Amalu Masnisin, it's a Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, if you're suspected of sleeping with a shifcha, and then she was subsequently freed, or maybe she was subsequently converted, you shouldn't marry her. And if he marries her, he doesn't have to divorce her. So I'm saying it's the same thing as the Mishnah over here in these cases. You're under suspicion, but if you married her, you didn't do a terrible thing. It's not like, right? Alma, what do you see? Just because of a rumor, we don't make him divorce his wife, make him divorce her. Meaning, in these cases, you're suspected of sleeping not with a married woman, right? Not with a married. You're suspected of sleeping with a shifcha or with a ravas kachavim. Or in these cases, you're suspected that maybe you only brought the get to divorce her, but you're not suspected of adultery per se, right? You're suspected that maybe you had some reason to get her divorced, or you had some reason to force her out of the marriage. Rashi, the top Rashi on Chavav, Bernana bnei Rinan Velaz bnei Adam, just because of rumors, lo armina hotzi. This is not comparable to the case where you're suspected of sleeping with a married woman. The husband, let's see, a bala, since her husband divorced her because of this suspected adultery. It's disgusting. In other words, it's one thing when a person, maybe you only brought the get, you're trying to get a divorce, whatever, or you're not matter the neder, or you're suspected of sleeping with a shiksa, which is not it's not adultery. It's an Israel for sure, but it's not adultery. But in the case of adultery, where a person was suspected of adultery with a married woman, and then her husband divorced her, and then the adulterer goes and marries her, that's disgusting. And there the Mishnah says you have to divorce her. But in these cases, if you married her anyway, even though you went against the rabbis, you don't have to divorce her. Tomorrow's daf is daf Chaf it'll be on the podcast, and on Sunday we'll start on daf Chaf Zayin from line number 8. Gufa, the beginning of line number 8 on daf Chaf Zayin. That's where we'll start Gufa. Shabbat Shalom l'kulam, Chodesh Tov.
Thank you.
Whoa.